Many of you are parents and will have had to think about the name to give to your baby. It can stick. I heard on the grapevine that I was to be called Aled, but my brother said no, say Alin, and so it was. But some parents give terrible names. They inflict pain forever on their poor child. It's not fair. And it's good that there should be at least one specifically Christian name where there's a link between the child and the patron saint. Those who are called Joseph have a privilege insofar as there's a great link there. He's a very powerful patron to have. It's good also to place your house, for instance, under his protection. Things kind of happen gently when he's around, and he provides for things as he did for the Holy Family. Now, the name given to this child was given by God himself. It had a meaning, Yeshuach, and it is actually already existing as a name. It's the same as we have in Joshua, but gradually it was going to be reserved to the Holy Child, although in some Hispanic countries they do use it sometimes. It's bizarre, but it's better not to use the holy name for anyone else. Now, the demon can't pronounce that holy name. He can't pronounce either the name of Mary. We can, and we should take care when we do so, which brings me straight away to the point. As it happens, hardly ordained, I was being sent on a weekly basis for the Mass at 11 o'clock, where this saint operated when he was a young man, Sejano. Bernardino of Siena was actually there at Sejano for years, at the Colombaio Hermitage, and he was a great reformer of Franciscans. But the Lord gave him a special mission, and it can be seen on this which he carried around, and which has on it, it looks like IHS. It's actually Iota, Eta, Roni, Sigma. The first three and the last letter of the holy name. And wherever he went, these ended up also on the lintels of the doors. So go to Tuscany and you'll find them in any old building. What was it about? Well, unfortunately, if you go to Tuscany to this day, you'll find that they're great swearers. When they're really in a bad mood, they're merciless towards the Madonna and add things to her. It's awful. God himself gets it in different forms, and it's very displeasing to the Most High. But it's also here in Ireland. All the time, they're using a toned down form of the holy name. Do you think that God isn't here? Joe Dalton, a great charismatic speaker, had gifts from the Lord, and he goes into the problem of what one does if one is in a place where it's going on all the time. And he had this answer given to him by the Lord, a way around it. Supposing that you're there against your will, and there's nothing much you can do because they're going to carry on with it all day anyway, it's their language. You can make it known once or twice, but then if they carry on, what does one do? Well, he found a method of actually hitting Old Nick on the head with his own weapon. It's this, and you can take it on board as well. It works. You hear an abuse of the holy name, you can do this, if nothing else works. Mentally, or even with your lips, you can say, "Praised be the holy name of Jesus Christ." And in any form you wish, you can glorify the one that's being wounded. Now, something happened when Joe Dalton started to do this. He noticed that over a while, without his having to say anything more, it actually diminished, until eventually it completely disappeared, because the Lord was being glorified, every name taken in vain. That is an abuse of the sacred. But there are others as well. it's the vulgar. You don't have to use vulgar words. If you do, you class yourself as vulgar. It's particularly unpleasant in a woman, actually. She uses all her dignity. But there are actually ways and means of detecting from a person's language what his level of culture is. A person who is so lazy that he can't do anything but extremely powerful words to make a point, usually vulgar and infested with a demon, then he shows that he is not a free thinker. He's in the mode that he's expected to be in. He's like a chameleon who blends into his surroundings and cannot be distinguished. And Christians, actually even priests, can find themselves in that. It's particularly actually unpleasant when a consecrated person uses bad language. A priest, for instance, is the one that the Lord uses at the altar and actually courteously asks to be given the use of his vocal cords to speak in his name. This is my body. I absolve. And for that same mouth and tongue to be abused and to turn against God the gift of speech in blasphemy and vulgarity is really unpleasant before the angels and should give room to pause. Now, as a confessor, I'm quite surprised over the years the number of times that during the very act of hearing confession, bad words come out. Either the name of God or some shape or form of using something holy, or actually really unpleasant vulgar words during the celebration of a sacrament in which the penitent is asking for forgiveness, committing sins in the very act of asking for forgiveness, and they don't blink an eyelid. They've never really thought about it. It's a sin, never discussed. It's okay because everyone does it. And I've got news for you. Nothing is excused by what other people do. Blaise Pascal, the great French philosopher, said, "On meurt seul." One dies alone. And by that he meant, in the context of the 1600s, in the art of dying, the ritual of dying with one's family, asking for forgiveness, it was not actually a social event. In the last resort, one was nuda cruda as a soul before the king, the high king, who actually did have the last word and had heard it all. So, at the beginning of this year, let's at least make that concrete resolution, never ever to abuse the gift of speech. But there's another one too that we could take on board at the beginning of this year. It's the one with regard to the use thereof. The year is made of moments. And if we're careful, we can actually stamp them and consecrate them as they come. I'll give you at the end something I composed when thinking about this, exactly 1 year after arriving the first time from here in Ireland to Rome. Because when one is leaving, one is looking forward to all kinds of great mirages on the other end. The grass is always greener. And little did I know that 1 year later, the abbot had sent me was going to be in bits. And sometimes looking forward is actually better than the moment there. So don't fall into that pitfall this year. Use the moment of the awaiting and its grace too, for sometimes it's more beautiful than the moment you've ruined waiting for. You never lived the moment before it, as though the future were always better. Live this moment. It might be far better than you think later on. One mode to do well this act of living in the present is to cultivate one specific virtue: thankfulness. It's just a mode of being very different from what's out there. I mentioned to you before, when I was a child, in chapel one morning, it must have been about 6 or 7, and the preacher looked us all in the eyes and showed us this piece of paper. It was a big white blotting paper. But in the middle, there was a blot. He asked each one of us, in Welsh of course, "What do you see?" And we all, to a man, answered, "A blot." Not one of us answered, "A white sheet." Life is rather like that, my friends. We only complain. So, it applies to each other and to life in general. We can actually protect our bliss by being actually always grateful for anything at all. The person who finds fault with all is a grumpy, unpleasant person to live with and is a heavyweight. There are some who go through life never complaining. Which of the two do we want? It applies to our gratitude to each other as well, my friends. Never take each other for granted. I go back to where I started and leave you with this. I remember in school, because they were trying to bring us up as reasonably good educated boys as well as just academics. It was a good school. And the RI teacher was also the English teacher. He spoke Welsh. We used to call him Copperbonds because he was red-haired. He came out with this one day in the English lesson. With regard to bad language, it's a lazy use of language. The people who are able to invent something a bit more refined are actually on a higher notch than those who can only use the lowest common denominator of vulgarity. I remember in 1974, I spent the Easter vac on Cordy Island with the monks. And I remember we were working with the novice master in the garden, and he had to move this big glass house shed which had rails and wheels. So there we were, and he was directing this operation. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Hee! Ready? 1, 2, 3. Hee! One more time. 1, 2, 3. Hee! No bother. Now I thought that's actually good restrained use of a word beginning with B. And I remember in the ambit of Ampleforth that used to run our parish, they had the same mode of being very restrained. If something would go wrong, it would be simply, "Oh, fiddlesticks." So remember those tips, my friends. You can actually be slightly more refined than the vulgar person next to you, and avoid also blotches on your copybook.